Well, hello there, amazing people. We are doing another reaction. This is by request. If you want to request a video I should look at or react to or whatever you will call it, go on to my Discord. There's links below, and I have a section called video ideas. You can go in there and you can request video ideas either for reaction videos or tech videos. This is like Linux distros I can't stand from 2010 or something like that. And when you look at the channel here and you look at the thumbnails, it looks a little bit like a discount version of Matthew Moore, I think his name is. Oh no, not Matthew Moore, the Mental Outlaw. No, so but anyway, let's see what this is all about, and let's get on with it.
I know what all of you are thinking. What are you thinking of this title? I thought you use Linux. We see Linux in most of your desktop. What's the big deal? There are some Linux distros I cannot stand. I hate, like, a lot of people. I'm not going to name names, especially on YouTube. They love to put forth a lot of Linux distros, say this is the best Linux distro for XYZ, whatever. So first, I'm only going to talk about desktop. And now, I understand this video might get me in trouble.
I'm only going to talk about desktop. So is it desktop environments or desktop Linux? I guess it's desktop Linux, not server Linux.
I know some Linux users, whatever users means, are
users. You're using a product. You're using a service. He is a user of YouTube. He
so biased they'll berate other YouTubers into participating in challenges. They're illy prepared to even do. I made a list.
That's the point of a challenge. You know, that's the fun of it. You know, when I used to have a workout board, it's like, you can't bench press this much. And we know that they will have difficulty with it, but it's the challenge of it. That's why we do challenges. We are not prepared. That's the fun of it. You have to train for it or learn stuff. That's the fun of it. If you do a challenge that you already know you can fulfill and you already are prepared for and you already know will succeed, it's not a challenge.
Of the top most hated Linux distros I could think of. And I'm going to make this even broader. This is going to be categories of distros you should not use.
Oh, I'm going to stop a lot. He has no authority of saying that you should use or not use a distribution. It's like saying, these are the shirts you should not use, these are the shoes you should not wear, these are the microphones you should not buy, blah, blah, blah. It's personal opinion. He can give, like, he could say, this is the distributions I don't like and therefore don't use. Here's the thing. When someone is telling you what to do, they don't have your own best interest at heart because they're only thinking about themselves. General rule, there are caveats.
And I think this is a good template into understanding my mentality, at least using a Linux distro. Here's number one. My number one on this list is distros with opt-out telemetry. What does that mean? You have to understand that one of the benefits Linux provides as an operating system is it has the ability to offer you privacy. Opt-out telemetry means that in order for you to not have it, the user needs to opt out of it. So by default, the operating system needs to track you. Obviously, because Linux is Linux, you can do things to remove such telemetry. And that's just a good segue. The first, we made a video about...
The cutting out is irritating, but here's the thing: if you don't want to use a distro because it has opt out, or you physically have to, you have to tick a box or meddle with some settings to opt out of sending data and stuff like that. What the fuck are you doing on YouTube? Why do you have a credit card? You cannot do anything in this world, in today's society, because everything is opt out, or not everything. Most things are opt out. YouTube, you can't even opt out of all of that fucking shit. Your email addresses, in a lot of instances, you can't opt out of it. It's kind of my problem with the Linux community is that they're so highly privacy focused and telemetry focused, and then they're using services that are misusing their privacy way more than any fucking distribution or any operating system have done. Like just Google product compared to Microsoft. Microsoft is like a stepchild that just took your candy one time. Where Google and YouTube and all of those services, they are taking your candy all the fucking time, and they're taking it before you even know you have any candy. So it's really, really funny, in my opinion, that we don't care about opt-out and opt-in and data collection on the web. We only care about the operating system, even though that it's only a drop in the water. This telemetry data collection debate is not something that's only specific to software. This goes for everything in your life. If you are up, in the know-how of this, if you are worried about this, you have to be worried about it in all aspects of life, because if you're just only protecting yourself on your operating system or for a specific software, you'll be moving 1 to 2% of what's actually being gathered about you. Basically, it's like locking one window and leave all the rest opens. And you think this is the most important window, so therefore I close this window. No, you need to lock all of your windows. And people like this, they don't seem to grasp the layers of complexity that you actually are talking about here, or this subject.
About Ubuntu collecting telemetry about people and how to remove it. Ubuntu is guilty of this. I can't stand this. The fact that Ubuntu tracks you by default, and even if you say no, still tracks you, is disgusting.
There's a way here any software do that. If you're phoning home, when you're doing a sudo apt update, if you're doing a pacman -SYU, you are sending telemetry to a server that is matching that telemetry with your system to see if there's any updates. That can be used to track you. That can be used to get information about your system. It can even be used to figure out where the fuck you are in the world if you're crafty enough. Think about that.
I can't even wrap my head around it. I mean, granted, with Ubuntu, it could be a lot worse. It could be, you could be using Windows. You could be using macOS. In fact, you could be using a Chromebook, the worst option of all. Zorin OS. Yes, there is a package in the popular beginner Linux distribution, Zorin OS, which allows them to track their users. It's a package called Zorin OS Census. Yes, they track you by default.
I think that has been taken out, if I'm not mistaken. I want to know what that video is from. So yeah, here, 2019 seems to be the copyright date. I think they got in too much flack for it and they took it out. This is the problem when they don't put, citation in their notes where they got the information from, is that you don't know how old this information is.
And like Ubuntu, they claim to anonymize your information. But what, you don't know what this one-man distro is really doing with your information.
And by the way, it's not a one-man distro. I hate Zorin, but it's not a one-man distro. It's a corporation.
You can't seriously trust some random guy.
It's not a guy.
Information. It's crazy.
But their website says make your computer better, period. How could they possibly be lying?
Let's get it.
That's not what they're talking about.
Into some of the ones that are. Let me get into 2 Linux OSs that don't follow this. At least of Zorin OS and Ubuntu, right? You can remove the telemetry from it or suppress to such a degree that it's non-existent, right? But let's get into some of the ones that are this sort of telemetry is a problem. Deepin OS. Yes, the Deepin OS, the creators of the Deepin desktop environment, is created by some Chinese company I don't know the name of. I can't read Chinese. However, they have a deal to make you sign a EULA when you use the OS so that you sell your soul to the CCP. Wow.
Again, no. Have you read the EULA? Have you read what it actually says? Oh, down here, already here, it says privacy policy Unitech software has formulated strict privacy policies for protecting the user's personal data and attached great importance on the protection of the user's personal information. If you want to criticize the EULA, read the EULA so you can say, here, look here, in this specific fucking sentence, they are saying what I'm saying they're doing.
This is exactly what I want in my operating system. they are also caught implementing analytics into their store. They were using the Chinese equivalent of Google Analytics, CNZZ. Stupid. Oh my gosh. Deepin is probably one of the worst operating systems you can run. I don't want to make any statements with Deepin Desktop Environment. If you like it, great. But there are billions of other ways to use it than using Deepin itself. You can use something like Fedora. You can use Arch.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
Well, let me get into one of the worst Linux distros with opt-out telemetry. That one is, drumroll please, Steam OS. Yes, it requires an account for you to do anything, period. Just like
YouTube, email account, social media, banking, your healthcare system. Should I go on?
a Chromebook. Wow. This is exactly what I want out of my Linux distro. Did you know Valve can also track you and has made it harder for you to run custom operating systems on it? And how?
What the fuck do you expect? It's a consumer device. It's a consumer device. It's a console you hold in your hand. The hardware in the Steam Deck is the same hardware as you have in PlayStations and Xboxes. It's closer to a portable console than a portable PC. Of course they're going to lock the shit down. It gives them control. It makes sure they can earn more money. Did you thought for 1 second that Valve was your friend?
How do you install a different OS on your Steam Deck, you might ask? By logging into your Steam account and enabling developer mode. Wow, haha.
They made it. It's their product. They can do whatever the fuck they want with their system.
Ha ha ha.
Aha.
Not even Deepin went that far.
Yeah, I don't like that. I agree with that. Having to log in order to opt out is ridiculous. Being required to have the thing that you don't want to have in order to opt out is ridiculous.
And this is why, kids, you don't use distros with telemetry. This is why
He's probably 20 years old and he's calling people kids. You know what, kids?
I didn't buy a Steam Deck.
Well, this is why we as the consumers should push back against the practice. Because it's one thing to say, for at least me on the other end of the more consumer-minded individual, I think that there is a difference between a company opting you in and encouraging the average person to do something, and a company literally making it impossible for you to do something.
Yeah, you just don't buy it. But don't tell other people what to do with their money and their time. If they don't mind it, they can do it. And I would debate that he's a consumer-minded intelligent consumer, to be honest.
Or making it so difficult to do it that no reasonable person can do so. Like creating a Windows 11 account without a Windows login. Yes, you can do it, but the number of hoops you have to jump through in order to do it is so ridiculous that the average person isn't going to.
Again, they don't care. Why should they? If they don't care, again, this is a person that wants everyone to live the life he's living. That's not the way he uses computers and consumer electronics. Is like how 1% of the society is doing it. Why should everyone else do what he's doing when they are not, or when he's living in a world that most people are not living in? I don't like this.
And that's too far.
This is why you don't use opt-out telemetry. All right, let's roll into the second one. Number 2, distros which freeze security updates on you or are really slow to patch them. And I need to talk about this one because there are some Linux distributions that are incredibly guilty about or not providing security updates in a timely manner. Is everyone's favorite alleged newbie distribution, Manjaro. They freeze Arch packages for 2 weeks. That means you don't get security updates except for stuff they whitelist.
Again, not understanding the distribution in question. Okay, first of all, Manjaro is not Arch, it's based on Arch. What Manjaro is trying to do is they're kind of trying to be the user-friendly LTS version of an Arch-based distribution. So, they freeze packages to make sure that they are stable, they don't break the system during an update, they can do some initial testing to give the end user a more consumable and convenient and easy experience. That's why they're doing it. Also, security, as they said here, fast-tracking security updates. That means that if there is really important security updates that are important, they get fast-tracked, or they get like security, as far as I understand it anyway, security updates gets priority. Also, this is really important. Understand the version numbering of your distribution. Because if you use Arch and you're using software versions 1.10 and you're using Ubuntu software version 1.10, don't mean that they are the same software. Because you can backport in security fixes and features into existing software. That's I have a video that's going to be released about this. It's plainly not understanding how distributions are made or packages are being done. It really drives me up the wall.
For 2 weeks, good luck getting updates. Desktop Linux distributions, you have no excuse. And funny how this isn't even a problem that Manjaro has had in the past. One time, one of their certificates expired, and what was their solution to getting around the certificate? Just wind your clock back when the certificate was valid.
Ooh, that's not a good solution.
That's an awful solution, Manjaro team. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Don't even get me started on the can of worms that is beginner users should not be using Arch Linux, but whatever.
Manjaro is not Arch Linux. I will now show you that the Arch Linux developers themselves say Manjaro is not Arch Linux. How the fuck can a guru of Linux not understand that? The lack of research that people do nowadays makes my fucking balls shrink to a fucking fetus size.
Whatever. Right. And the third one. Right. This is one that really bugs me. I know this one's gonna rattle some people's bones when I say it. If the first two didn't rattle people's bones already, let me get into the third one. I hate people running Debian as a desktop operating system. Because
heretic, blasphemer.
And I'm talking about both Debian stable and Debian testing. Mind you, both of them are late with security updates because Debian has the delusion that they need to test everything so finely and minutely because we have millions and billions of servers out in the world.
So Red Hat Linux is unsecure and are doing it wrong. SUSE Linux is unsecure. SUSE Linux Enterprise is unsecure and doing it wrong. Ubuntu LTS is unsecure and doing it wrong. Again, previous statement, know how they do their development. He has just read a fucking article or something like that. He hasn't looked into how they are doing the distribution. Debian give you security updates. And they do it in a timely manner. Again, like I said, if it's really critical, it gets fast-tracked. If it's not critical, they do a little bit more testing. And Debian is really good with security updates. Just like Red Hat is, just like SUSE is. And yes, for servers, it's really important that you don't break their system because downtime for a minute can mean hundreds of thousands of dollars lost in revenue. So if there is an exploit that can only be exploited if you have physical access to a server, they may not prioritize that so much as an exploit that can be used right now remotely.
And we need to keep those stable. But when it comes to desktop users, you need to get your stuff instantly.
No, you don't.
I remember a few years ago, 5 years ago, there was a leak in GNOME 28 where there was a memory leak in the desktop environment. So it would just perpetually use 2 gigs of RAM when it didn't need to.
That's not a security risk, that's a bug. No the things, and it's not a critical bug either. Because most systems nowadays have more than 2 gigs of RAM. Is it irritating? Is it something that should be fixed? Yes, but it's not a critical bug. It's not making your system break. Like, there are only a fine amount of developers that can work on your free and open source software that you don't have to pay for, by the way. And you are leeching off their goodwill. So they have to prioritize again what is most important to work on. And if something is not system breaking, but only an annoyance, it may get bumped down on the list.
When did Debian fix that? 3 years later. You kidding me? This is the kind of
Again, understand version numbering. Do you know that they only fixed it 3 years later, or did they backport that fix into the existing GNOME desktop environment? Know your version numbering.
Delusion that I'm talking about. They think that, well, we need to preserve my stability, and what if an update breaks something? When you install something on Debian, you're installing the version of something of X program, whatever was frozen in time. Let's use LibreOffice for example. Right? The current version of LibreOffice in Debian Bullseye is not the same version of LibreOffice. That's the same rolling release version of LibreOffice that's given to Windows users.
And if you look down here, we have -4 plus deb 11 U1. That means that the Debian developers have done something to this package. The version number you should be looking at is the -4 plus deb 11 U1. And then you have to again understand how the distribution is maintaining and doing packages to see if they have backported stuff in here, fixed bugs that are being fixed in newer releases, and stuff like that to this release here. Because there could be fixes and security fixes in this software here right now that got fixed in a newer release of the software. So even though you're running an older version of the software, you're still benefiting from the newer security fixes and bug fixes. How do you know this? By understanding how your distribution and doing version numbering.
Or Mac users, or people with rolling release Linux distros, or people with like cutting edge Linux distros, you will never see that in Debian. And those versions of LibreOffice might have nice things like updated Word documents, better PowerPoint support.
That can also be backported into older version of the software. Again, Red Hat do this. And maybe Debian do the same, I don't know.
New features in LibreOffice Calc or Base. No, you don't get any of those features. You'll get them in 3 years like everyone else. Are you kidding me? Plus, the gall of Debian to say, we have the ability to use our Siphon, our large community user base, to backport security updates into old versions of software. It's like, guys, you could just use the new versions of the software.
Yeah, but if you use the new version of the software, you can then implement system-level breaking points by the new software version is not compatible with existing APIs. So if you are implementing a newer version of said software, you now have to update the APIs that then are depending on other libraries you now have to update. And now you basically have to almost update your whole system. That could then mean that you're breaking your system. Therefore, they are backporting stuff into existing software because it's already in a working, stable state. So if they are backporting in a bug fix or a security fix or a feature, they are only, altering a small amount of code instead of altering all of the code in the software. That then have ripple effects into other APIs and libraries that then may also need to be upgraded and altered. And when you alter them, then other software may not work because they rely on older version of that software. Now you have to fit with those with that piece of software. You get what I'm trying to say here? It's to uncomplicate something that can be potentially devastating to your system stability.
It will just work with the updates. Number 3, and I want to talk about this because this is a severe problem that I'm seeing spread through a lot of Linux YouTube outlets. Okay, Libre-only Linux distributions. Now, hear me out. I like free software. I like software freedom and open source software. Really, I do. But the problem is, there are some security fixes that need to be done to proprietary software. Just a few weeks ago, Lenovo released firmware updates to their BIOS because their proprietary BIOS needed to get updated. And so Intel, with their microcode during Windows Patch Tuesday, which is the second Tuesday of every month, would you get those fixes if you're on a Libre-only distribution? No, you don't get them. No security fixes for you because it's proprietary. Why would you need to update your proprietary software, your proprietary firmware?
That's some people are willing to live with that. That's why they use them. Again, telling you what to do and not listening to what you want. If you was that into the FROS mentality, if you are okay with not having the latest security updates, if you're okay with having a less stable system, you should be allowed to run it. There's nothing more to say.
You couldn't possibly be using anything like that. And what even annoys me more is these people do it under they have this sort of like Slytherin-esque purist philosophy where they're just like, oh, we're just so pure, we can never allow just a little blob of proprietary software to get any.
Let them, for fuck's sake. Let them. Just ignore them and be like, yeah, good luck with all your fucking hacker attempts. I don't, like, if you want to live that fucking vegan lifestyle, get your B vitamin 12 somewhere else, man.
But what they do is they package in dumb stuff like insecure forks of Firefox or whatever, which...
Again, it's a trade-off they're willing to take, so let them. If you want to live in a place that's riddled with fucking violence and you don't want to lock your door, maybe not a good idea, but hey, you do you, man. And then you can have a hobo standing and peeing in your desk the next morning.
You can't don't get meaningful updates for, and they don't get meaningful updates for.
What is a meaningful update? What's meaningful for you may not be meaningful for them. He wants people to live his life. They don't.
Read this article here from Adrian Connell about the relationship with firmware harms the open source movement and the free software movement as a whole, and why they don't secure their users, because they prioritize their philosophy over people's security, which is stupid.
I would argue that philosophy is counter to encouraging open source software, because by being so stalwartly against proprietary software, you're removing the ability to use proprietary software.
I am agreeing with what he's saying. But that don't give me the right to say that you should not run that system and you should not run FOSS-free Libre distributions if you like to. I agree with him, but I am not here to tell you what to do with your system, your money, and your time.
So hard pass on those stupid Libre distributions. That means no Trisquel, no Parabola. I ain't using them. I ain't gonna do it. This article by the Debian repos, I believe, is incredibly important. This is from Debian's actual developers, and I know I just unleashed a lot of hate on Debian. Please hear me out, okay? I cannot stand Frankenstein Linux distributions. What does that mean? Frankenstein distribution is a distribution which mixes repositories between the old and stable software and the bleeding edge software. Don't make a Franken Debian.
That's Debian's definition of it. Other people have other definition of Frankenstein distros. It could be like Peppermint back in the day when Mark Creeps did it with was it LXDE mixed in with XFCE? You know, they are mixing basically two desktop environments together. That could be looked at as a Frankenstein distribution. This is all about definition. So he's subscribing to the Debian Frankenstein definition. That don't mean that, you know, if you're defining it in another way that you're right or he's wrong. This is all about definition and what you subscribe to. It's an opinion.
Which means combining Debian releases with other Debian releases. Now, what exactly does that mean, right? What, you use PPAs? PPAs are the very thing which cause Frankenstein distributions. Never use Ubuntu's PPAs because it causes problems.
Never use them under Debian, use them under Ubuntu, but like any other fucking piece of software, when you're going out to use third-party plugins, third-party add-ons, third-party repositories, you have to trust the developer developing that software. So use it at your own risk.
Right? And the fact that you even have to commit some of this patchwork to use secure versions of software in Debian or newer versions of stuff in Debian is crazy when you think about it. So really, it's kind of hypocritical if you think about it. Whatever. Let's play along with it here because I think there's some truth. That's true. There's some truth to this, right? Ubuntu is another great. Ubuntu's not a good example. Here's a better one. Linux Mint. Yes, the Linux Mint. Linux by the guy from Warframe Linux Mint has this problem where they have a bleeding edge version of Cinnamon Desktop in their own applications, but the rest of their operating system is based on Ubuntu or Debian, which causes them to mix versions of frozen in time software like Ubuntu or Debian compared to normal versions of their software. I found this fork of Linux. I have never actually learned.
Yeah, what's the problem with how Mint does it? The way that the desktop is working and the desktop libraries is not how the subsystems and the core libraries are working with Ubuntu. Look at it like this. You have Ubuntu here. You have Cinnamon here. This is kind of running independently of this. So you can have this in a more newer version than this. That's what they're doing. That's what Pantheon Elementary OS is doing with Pantheon. They're taking a rock solid base and they're doing their own little thing on top of that base that rarely speak with each other. And when you have to speak with each other, like a little bit like this, they make sure that this connection is actually great and works well. But it has been done for decades with good success, so I don't get what the problem is here.
Learned anything about it, but I want to throw it out here. Called Unofficio Zero Linux. I actually cannot read any of this because now I didn't want to comment. I can't read any of this. It's written in Italian, so I can't actually. I don't know Italian. I'm
Google
going
Translate.
in the dark here. Officio Linux is a fork of Linux Mint. It is a fork of Ubuntu and a fork of Debian. What?
No. Let's clarify this a little bit. Ubuntu is based on Debian. It's not really a fork. It's based, meaning that they are taking packages from Debian, modifying to make their Ubuntu distribution and repositories. Mint is more of a respin of Ubuntu, meaning that it's highly compatible with Ubuntu, meaning that everything you can do under Ubuntu, everything that works under Ubuntu works under Linux Mint. But everything you do on Mint and everything you do under Ubuntu don't work under Debian because they don't share the same DNA, so to speak. They have a lot of common strain in their DNA. Like, they can be cousins. But there are things you do under Ubuntu, there are things that are set up in a way under Ubuntu that don't work under Debian. But what works under Ubuntu also works under Mint. They are basically not single egg twins, but they are kind of twins. One is just, have a little bit of different face than the other one have. So what works under Mint works under Ubuntu. What works under Ubuntu works under Mint. They're just using different software. You can take the Ubuntu Mint, the Linux Mint repository, and install that on Ubuntu LTS, and you will have no problem running it. Or you can install the Ubuntu desktop on Linux Mint and have no problem running it. But you can't take the Mint desktop from Linux Mint and run it under Debian. You can't take the Ubuntu desktop and just add the repo to Debian and run it. You probably have some problems right now.
What? How can you do this? Look at all of these. Like, this is a fork. Think about this one in particular, right? The fork of Linux Mint. This means that Officio Linux is a fork of Linux Mint, which itself...
No, it's a respin of Linux Mint. If it's a fork, they are doing something different with the core code base, and apparently they are not.
Is a fork of Ubuntu.
No, Mint is not a fork of Ubuntu. It's kind of like a respin of Ubuntu or repackaged version of Ubuntu.
Ubuntu is a fork of Debian.
No, Ubuntu is a fork of Debian. My bad. Now we're going somewhere because it's not sharing the same 100% binary compatibility and DNA as Debian. So yeah, it's a fork.
So it's a fork of a fork?
No, it's a fork of a... No, it's a respin of a respin that's a fork. It's a respin of a respin that's a fork of a distribution. That's how you should say it. I think that's if I get all the respins correctly.
Of a fork? Of a fork?
Get a fork.
Why would I go through all of this trouble when I could just use Ubuntu or Debian?
I don't know. Choice.
Because you could just fork Ubuntu or Debian.
Wow.
Why don't you fork this distro?
These forks
And fork this distro.
But these forks are exactly the problems Debian talks about here. Don't make Franken distros.
No, it's not the forks they are talking about. They are talking about mixing Ubuntu PPAs with Debian stable or using Debian testing repository under Debian stable. So have both Debian testing repository enabled and Debian stable enabled at the same time. That's what they mean. Or taking the Linux Mint Cinnamon repository, enabling it under Debian. You know, that's what they mean by the Frankenstein. You're going outside of the scope of the project and using third-party repositories that are not validated and ready to work under the Debian. That's what they mean.
It hasn't got mentioned yet, but a lot of Linux YouTubers always look over this one. I cannot stand one-man or small team Linux distributions.
I can't stand one-man small team Linux YouTubers then.
Hate them. I hate them for burning passion. Everyone loves to flaunt around the Linux distribution. Arco Linux. Want to go find Arco Linux? ArcoLinux.info. The website looks like it was made in like 2009. The problem, distributions like Arco Linux, is distributions like Arco Linux are maintained by one guy.
Okay, really? Here you go. Arco Linux is a one-man team. Eric Dupris, aka Arco Linux Eric, team leader, developer, content creation. Stefan Young, developer, beta tester. Peniel Laguna, beta tester, social media engagement. Developer, Johan Belvins, I love that last name. Developer, beta tester. Marco Abate, developer, beta tester. Forum leader, developer, beta tester. It's not a one-man team. At least we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 developers. 6, 7 developers working on it. This took me less than a minute to figure out, okay? Yes, there are a lot of one-man distributions out there, but at least if you're going to criticize a distribution, make sure you pick the right one to criticize.
What if that one guy decides to issue a malicious thing through his repository? Well, you're out of luck.
Nope. We have, was it 6 or 7 other developers that can catch that, plus beta testers.
Maybe you should get a new operating system.
Isn't SSH maintained by like one guy?
But the difference between SSH and something like Arco Linux is a huge one. And that's this. Eyes on software. Eyes on open source software is huge because if no one is looking at your thing, Arco Linux, no one is looking at your thing, you could have millions of problems and no one even knows.
Eyes on a product, again, I understand why people want me to react to this video. Eyes on a software. It's not how many people have eyes on your software, it's how many people that look at your software that actually fucking know what's going on. I can give him the source code to the Linux kernel. Find all bugs and security problems that's in the latest source code. He will probably pee himself out of frustration, have no fucking idea what's going on. And there could be thousands of people like him and me that don't know how the source code looks like and how on Linux we don't understand, because you need to have intimate, detailed knowledge about how it's developed to understand it. You don't, just because you're a C developer don't mean you understand the source code, because they are doing things and have different, design philosophies than other projects. So you need to have intimate, detailed knowledge about those kind of things. So it's not about how many eyes is on, it's about how many people that actually understand the software are looking at the software.
As opposed to SSH, which is also an open source project, probably maintained by one guy, is actively used by millions of people around the world and has all sorts of eyes on it because everyone wants to break into servers.
And Arco Linux utilizes 90% or 99% of the code base from Arch Linux, meaning that they are utilizing all of the eyes that is on Arch Linux. So if you don't, here's the thing. If you don't recommend Arco Linux, you can't recommend Arco Linux. You can't recommend Arch Linux. Because Arco Linux is a modified version with extra tools done by the Arco team of Arch Linux. But for all intents and purposes, it's just taking Arch and repackaging it. and putting some extra tools on it. So if you want to criticize Arco Linux, you have to criticize the Arco Linux specific tools that they make. That is only native to Arco Linux. If you're criticizing the kernel, GNOME, or any other components that come straight out of Arch, you are criticizing Arch, because Arco Linux don't mess with the kernel. They probably don't mess with, like I said, 99% of the Arch base that they are based on. They just take it from the Arch, repackage it, put some fairy dust, meaning some extra programs that they make onto it, and send it out to the world.
Including big companies that have a vested interest in making sure SSH isn't compromised.
Exactly. This is why you need to have eyes on your software.
You need to have qualified eyes on your software. You need to put an asterisk in there.
Using one-off projects like Arco Linux.
It's not a one-off project. There's plenty of developers for it.
Or distributions maintained by just one guy or a small team of people.
Oh, now we are a small team now. So now it's not just one guy, it's a small team. Make up your you can't say small team and then be the one-man show. You can't stick to your guns here, man.
No one is looking at your distribution. Your distribution might as well just be proprietary. I don't care if you're open source.
Again, that's bullshit.
In fact, maybe your distribution, you might not be more secure because you're just obscuring the code, but it might honestly be better than you just making it open source in a weird sort of way.
That fucking mic cut out. Here's the thing, I would have redone that video. If that happened to me, I would have redone that video. It's almost unlistenable.
As opposed to you're using a distro like that people know about, like Ubuntu, Fedora, or Arch Linux, or whatever, right?
Well, yeah, use Ubuntu. What about Mint? That's also done by one man in charge and by a small team of developers. You should not use Mint then. His own words.
You're using a more mainstream distro. I know Linux users want to be the hip kids who want to be using something different, but guys, if you want to use a secure Linux distro and you want to use a distro that's going to treat you well, you're going to use a distro with a big audience.
Again, that's not true. Arco Linux is just as secure as Arch Linux because it's in the hands of the Arch Linux people. Mint is as secure as Ubuntu because it's in the hand of Ubuntu. Mint is 99% or 95% Ubuntu.
Lots of eyes looking at it.
In summary, you've hated on all of the distros under the sun that exist, so what distro do you condone that you do think is doing it right?
I'm glad you asked. I clickbaited everyone. I'm sorry, I have to do this. This is how the internet works.
No, it's not.
Let's go into the final point. Which distro would I actually use? Distro, number one distro I recommend to new Linux users, just use Fedora. If you don't like the GNOME desktop environment, that's totally okay, because the Fedora project has these things called spins. And these spins are variants of Fedora with different desktop environments. Look, we got KDE, we got XFCE, we got LXQT. And
don't have a problem with this, but here's the thing. Just because it's a big sponsored project don't mean that it can't be killed off. Just look at how Red Hat killed off CentOS.
Mate and Cinnamon and LXDE.
Yeah, we get it.
Every other fixed.
We get it.
Long-standing.
We get it.
More.
This is pointless. Just say Fedora. That's it. And I think he's going into other distributions. We don't need a fucking tutorial on how to run Fedora when that's not what the video is about.
Wait. If you know what you're doing, Arch Linux meme. I debated everyone of Arch Linux, but let me be an advocate against the Arch Linux meme for a second. Right? If you know what you're doing, Arch Linux makes the assumption you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, I am never going to recommend Linux to you until you know what you're doing.
True.
If you don't know what you're doing, you shouldn't be using Arch Linux.
True.
You're not ready to go through the installation process. You can.
Well, that's not like, because the Arch Linux instructions install guide is it's one thing. If you can read and understand what you're reading, you can install Arch. It's just following instructions. You kind of need to know what you're doing maintaining Arch, But installing it, you just need to be able to follow instructions. If you can read a recipe and follow the instructions, you can install Arch Linux.
Really, let me change that. You really want to, I don't know, what's something that people want from the repositories? But like Discord or whatever, I don't know, something, I don't know.
I'm waiting. Come on.
But like, you can get that stuff on other distros. And if you're not prepared to do reading, understand how people packaged, I don't know, the Microsoft Surface GTX daemon made by one guy. If you don't know
how, like, you can't fucking expect that each individual software is maintained by a corporation. Get your fucking head out of your...
to read any of this or vet, like, stuff, it's like, don't use AUR. You don't know how to read those package builds, don't use AUR. This is what I'm saying. You don't know what you're doing, don't use Arch Linux. If you know what you're doing...
Don't. You don't have to sit and read each and individual fucking AUR package in manifesto to run Arch and the AUR. Run it, and if shit breaks, figure out why it broke. But run Arch with the understanding that one day you will install something or you will update something and shit hits the fan. But if you're willing to deal with that, run Arch. It's not difficult, it's not complicated.
Ignore everything I just said, you know what you're doing. Third one. This one actually is one. So, third Linux distro. This one I feel like doesn't get enough attention. OpenSUSE. Not OpenSUSE Leap. Do not use OpenSUSE Leap. They ship you old versions of garbage.
No, they don't. I showed this in my video in my where OpenSUSE Leap fits in. They backport to the kernel SAW firmware so you can run the latest and greatest versions of hardware. Okay? They are also backporting security fixes, bug fixes into their existing software. Again, I go back to my previous statements about understanding version numbering for your distribution you're running, so you know what they are actually doing with the packages before you start to criticizing them on this area of things. Just because it says version 1.1, you could still be running the same fixes and features that is in 1.1.2. I do agree it don't get enough attention though.
We're gonna talk about this one. I want that Arch Linux experience. I want a rolling release distribution. I don't want to be like Fedora and upgrade like every year and go sit through that waiting.
Fedora is not every year, it's every 6 months. I think that was a slip, and if you think Fedora upgrades every year, he needs to have his Linux balls slapped a little bit.
Screen. I don't want to go through that. And I'll recommend that you check out OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. OpenSUSE Tumbleweed also has very good support because they replicate all the same work that Fedora does and Red Hat does. In fact, they replicate it so much they use the same packaging format.
No. Oh, I am an OpenSUSE fucking... Like, I'm sucking OpenSUSE's cock each morning. Okay, let me educate you here, my little friend. The RPM stands for the Red Hat Package Manager, was developed by Red Hat. OpenSUSE, or SUSE as it was called in the 90s, was originally based off Slackware. What they did is that they took Slackware, and at that time, the RPM package format, I think, was the best package format of them out there. So they took the RPM package format and put that on top of Slackware. Then after like a release or so, they have modified Slackware so much that it kind of became its own independent distribution, and it just happened to continue with the RPM package format. They did not replicate Red Hat, because Red Hat is independent. SUSE started out being based on Slackware, then became independent. However, they do use the RPM package format, but they're using their own software management called Zipper and libzip.
They use RPM, Red Hat Package Manager. But one thing that OpenSUSE Tumbleweed has that I think would help a lot of people who are new to Linux is the YAST settings menu. The YAST settings menu is possibly one of the most advanced GUI tools to interface with server and security tools and ways to configure your Linux distro that so many other distros are jealous of.
No, they're not. No, they're not jealous of it, because then they would try to mimic it. If you want to know if someone is jealous of something, they will mimic it. They are not jealous of it. I think what he's trying to say here is that it's an amazing, great tool that a lot of Linux distributions should be jealous of, but I don't think they are.
When Yast first came out, it was innovative in how settings menus were designed on Linux because of how many options it presented people. And the amount of freedom and the amount of things you could do through it is crazy.
You can kind of do the same things under the KDE settings manager, by the way.
And Yast is possibly one of the reasons why many people choose to use OpenSUSE.
Not really.
Those are the 3 distros that I would recommend to people. First, you're a beginner Linux distro user. You should use Fedora, right? And this is where I would recommend start learning some basics, like
blah, blah, blah. Come on.
There's instructions specifically just for Fedora. That's great. You unrolling your systems, you'll be fine. You're in good hands every year. Or if you feel more confident in yourself, you understand how to take advantage of things like Btrfs snapshots or rolling your system back or downgrading.
A lot of people run OpenSUSE without using Btrfs or Btrfs. Like I'm one of them, for example. I don't. It's not a consumer-friendly way of running your system, and most people, they don't really understand how Btrfs does and what it do and what the powers of it is. They run it because of the snapshot capabilities. You can get those capabilities with ext4 systems also by using something like Time Machine and other extensions to the file system. Most people just want Btrfs because it's the new thing.
Whatever. If you're a power user who wants just a little bit more control, I would push you towards OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. You get some great tools. Stuff is always going to be kept.
Yeah. Anyway, he's just mumbling along here. Some of the last bits here he need to cut it down, in my opinion, and fix it. Yeah, I'm sure he had fixed the mic. Yeah, it was almost unlistenable. I have again, this is like a Mental Outlaw clone. Him and Mental Outlaw should go into the fucking cabin in the woods and have some babies together, because they are as equally fucking delusional about Linux. Anyway, sidetrack. See you all later. Bye bye.